let's talk about cameras and see if we can find the best camera for your film project. What the best cameras are, push that camera to its limit. They went on to be quite successful. Exactly what you need. The camera that we used to shoot my very first feature film. A certain level of expertise. That isn't everything. There are a lot of different cameras out there, and with so many choices, how are you supposed to know which one is the best option for you and your film project? Let's go through a few of those camera types and identify some of the pros and cons. The first camera is one that most of us, if not all of us, own, and that is the phone. So the good thing about using phone cameras is that they are accessible and they are always available. You most likely have one yourself, and if you are one of the few that don't, then you most likely know someone else who does. These days, it is very easy for us to get our hands on a phone that has a good camera. Phones are perfect for beginner filmmakers because they are so easy to access and also easy to use. They do have good quality video, and by that I mean pretty much every new model of a phone can do 4K, for example. It can do slow motion, and it has a number of these features built in. The other great thing is that it doesn't require a lot of skill to use. They are designed so that someone without any experience filming can simply pick one up, press record, and that is it, they're done. It has built-in autofocus, built-in auto exposure settings, and a lot more. So this can be a very helpful tool if you do not have training in any professional film gear. But now let's look at some of the cons of using a phone for your film. As one of the pros, I mentioned its auto settings, but unfortunately that also falls under the cons section. Nearly everything about using a phone is automatic. And the problem with that is that filmmaking requires a lot of precision. It requires exact settings, and it requires the ability to adjust things until they are exactly what you need for that particular shot. There are a lot of apps for phones that allow you to access some of these features. They never really allow the full functionality that you would get from a professional camera. Another con that will no doubt be fixed someday in the future, and probably has been done on a lot of devices, is poor low light quality. Once all the lights go out, filming in dim or darker areas, the phone footage easily becomes quite grainy. Another con is that phones typically have a smaller sensor than you would get in a professional camera. This affects what kind of depth of field you can get within your camera. You'll see in a lot of new phones as well that instead of having the ability to shift focus, they instead have a cinematic mode, which essentially just blurs the background artificially and simulates what it would be like to have real depth of field. And then one of the most painful parts of using a phone to make your film is a very clunky workflow. It can sometimes be quite a nightmare getting a large amount of files from a phone onto a computer, especially since they don't allow you to simply plug your phone into the computer via a cable and transfer it all over. It's not always that simple, especially when you're going from, say, an iPhone to a PC, or an Android to a Mac, for example.
Yeah, Samsung's the worst. I hate Samsung. What are you saying about me, Apple? No way I'll ever work with Apple. Screw you, Samsung. You're a piece of...
Hey, that's enough, you two. Apple, you go sit in the corner. Samsung, you go to your room.
Can I have a toy?
No, you can't play with your toys. So phones are best used for beginners. A lot of people use them for short films. There are a lot of film festivals dedicated specifically to films made on phones. I would certainly say it would be a good exercise for every filmmaker to try to make a film with a phone at some point, just to learn what the process is actually like. This would be good for things like documentaries as well, especially if you're the type of documentary where you have to go into somewhere where you're not allowed to bring a lot of equipment. These are great for vlogs, as you have it with you at any moment, and it's pretty much the right camera for you if you don't have any other options. Next, we're going to talk about DSLRs. When you start venturing out into getting your first camera, it will most likely be some kind of DSLR or a mirrorless camera. So DSLRs are great cameras because they are capable of capturing good quality footage, and they start at very reasonable prices. You can get some DSLRs for just a few $100s. It does then range up to the mid or high thousands depending on what you are looking at. Of course, the DSLRs and the mirrorless cameras have interchangeable lenses, allowing that customization. You can go for something like a wide lens, so that you capture establishing shots or maybe getting some kind of crazy fisheye shot of a person. There's many things that you can do with a wide lens. You of course have complete control over the settings. You can adjust your ISO, your f-stop, your shutter speed. You can adjust everything to be exactly what it is that you need for your film. And as I mentioned, as a filmmaker, precision is key. DSLRs often have multiple purposes, as you can shoot video as well as photo. Some of the older models do not offer both of these options, so just keep an eye out for that. One thing to also look out for when you are purchasing a camera, and this goes for any of the types of camera, is looking for things like 4K. And it's not necessarily just because it does 4K, but 4K has been around for quite some time. So if you are looking at a camera and it doesn't have 4K, then it probably means it's quite old and all of the other specs are probably a bit outdated as well. One of the cons when you're looking at DSLRs compared to something like a phone is, of course, they are much bigger. They're a bit bulky, probably not too much. You can, and I have had to run around with one of these things all day with lenses attached and all. Comparing it to a phone, it is a bit of a bulky camera, and after a day of filming, your arm could potentially get quite sore if you don't put it down. The autofocus on a lot of DSLRs is typically a bit slower and maybe a little bit clunky, and in general, these are not as compact as the mirrorless cameras. DSLRs might be best for independent filmmakers, especially if you're doing something as a bit more low budget. You can use this for vloggers as you set it up on a tripod. It doesn't take up too much space in the room, and it's just for those who want just a little bit more manual control compared to the phone. Then we have the mirrorless cameras, very much like the DSLR, except they're a bit more compact and they are more lightweight. Mirrorless cameras often have really good autofocus, and they always have electronic viewfinders that show real-time exposure. Mirrorless cameras are great for all kinds of things. The one that I am using to shoot this video is the camera that we used to shoot my very first feature film. And while it is a good camera, we absolutely pushed that camera to its limits. And in order to do so, we did need to utilize some other pieces of equipment. Some of the cons for mirrorless cameras, and there aren't a lot, but because it is all digital and it has that digital viewfinder, it does chew up the battery faster than what you might get with a DSLR. Currently, there are fewer lens options for mirrorless cameras than there are for DSLRs. But that's not a huge issue though, because they are releasing more lenses as time goes on, but you can always purchase an adapter that'll allow you to use all of your normal lenses anyway. Every lens that I own is not built for my mirrorless cameras, and yet I have adapters that I attach to the camera. Mirrorless cameras are getting a little bit closer to that cinematic quality and are a great option, and I would say one of the first steps towards making those professional looking, high quality films. Not only that, but you can also utilize it as a side hustle doing corporate videos, real estate, weddings. They are typically nice, small, nimble cameras that allow you to run and gun, and yet they also have the quality to take on more higher production shoots. And then, of course, we have the cinema cameras. Now, the prices of cinema cameras is often one of the main barriers to this type of equipment. They can range anything from the thousands to the hundreds of thousands. And often you will usually make your way to a cinema camera after learning the ropes with some of the smaller types of camera. Cinema cameras are built a bit different. Whereas phones, DSLRs, and mirrorless cameras typically can do photo and video, cinema cameras, in most cases, don't. They are primarily designed to film video. They typically have very high quality images. They can usually shoot in RAW or color log. One thing to know as you upgrade through the different types of camera is that they do require a certain level of expertise. So the phone camera doesn't really need any experience. You can just take it out and go. Once you get to the DSLRs, it takes a little bit of time to practice before you really get the hang of it and get it exactly how you want. Then we get to cinema cameras, and these require some proper training. There is a lot more customization involved. You can program all of the different buttons on a cinema camera to do exactly what it is that you want. Cinema cameras are built to work with professional audio equipment as well. On this particular camera at least, when you go into the menu setting, almost everything about this camera is customizable. And it's not only learning about the settings of this camera, but also then how to use it as well. Cinema cameras can typically handle very complex lighting situations. The cons, as I mentioned, they are quite expensive. They are very large, so you wouldn't really want to spend your day running and gunning with a camera like this. This is more so a camera that you would want to have either on a tripod or on some other kind of setup. A lot of other cinema cameras do also require that you purchase accessories before you are actually able to use it. This one here has a built-in handle, a built-in screen, built in other things where maybe a brand like Red, you have to purchase all of those individual pieces that then get attached to the main body. Cinema cameras are best for those filmmakers who really want to take things seriously and push their projects to the next level. There are a lot of things you might need to learn about using cinema cameras. One thing that I like to do is check out the Netflix approved cameras. While that isn't an extensive list determining what the best cameras are, it's a good way to understand what certain companies might be looking for. This one here, which is the Canon C70, is a Netflix approved camera. And even if this camera was never used to actually film a Netflix movie, it's still a very nice thing when I'm working with clients and I can mention that is a Netflix approved camera. They don't really know what the specs mean, but they know what Netflix is, and so they go, oh. So you can use this for short films, for feature films, for music videos, and anything where high-end production value is needed. So those are some of the main cameras, but that isn't everything. You could also go with something like an action camera, a GoPro, for example. Now, these wouldn't be your main camera for a film, but there are special circumstances that might require it. For example, maybe you are a film on a budget, but one scene involves some footage of somebody skydiving. Give them a GoPro and let them capture it that way. Then out in the world, you'll often see other specialty equipment such as the Ronin 4D, for example. Now again, this wouldn't be a main camera, but you would use it for special circumstances, or because it moves funny, looks like a chicken, and you have a lot of money that you don't need. There is also another thing that you really need to know before you make a decision about what camera you need to get. And I'm going to go into that in just a moment. But first, let's talk about using some creative options. None of these cameras are exactly better than another. They are simply built for different purposes. And you might find that one of these is more suitable for your situation. The other thing to remember is try not to be limited by what you have available. If all you have is a phone, then do everything that you possibly can do with that phone. And there is a lot. Go out there and watch all of the films that are made with a phone. You can use a phone just as it is. There are also a lot of ways that you can potentially customize a phone, and I have seen some pretty impressive setups in the past. But don't let anything limit you. There was a team a few years back that made a film using the reverse camera of a car, and whether it was satire or not, it still puts the idea in our heads that even though it is an ambitious, crazy idea, it doesn't mean that we can't do it. If you want to somehow make an entire movie using a dash cam, then go for it. If you somehow have the capability of making an entire movie using CCTV, then go for it. There are films like Paranormal Activity that give a great example of this, using found footage to create a story. While the concept of those movies are quite simple, they went on to be quite successful. Don't be limited by what you have available. See what you do have and brainstorm how you can use it to its fullest potential. Finally, the one thing that a lot of people miss when they are buying their first camera. They will put in so much time and effort into buying the camera. Just as important as buying a great camera, you need to buy lenses that match. And sometimes that means getting a lens where the price actually matches the camera. It's not always the case, but it can be. The camera is important, but if you put a bad lens on it, you're going to get bad footage. So if you do end up getting a nicer camera, then make sure that you respect it by giving it a matching companion. If you found this video useful, then please subscribe, as I would love to keep making more content just like this in the future. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Oh.